Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about, is Kriya Yoga the most advanced spiritual practice? So there are many people that say that Kriya Yoga is the most advanced spiritual practice you can do. And certainly people who get into Kriya Yoga, it is a very involved practice. People are usually very disciplined about it. And they do their meditations twice a day, right? They do a certain number of these sitting meditations for minutes or numbers of Kriya. And so Kriya Yoga is like, you usually have to be really dedicated to do Kriya Yoga. And the people who do it are usually very dedicated, right? One might almost say fanatical about their practice. Now, people often think it is the pinnacle of yoga, the pinnacle of a yoga meditation. It's using this internal pranayama technique, this life force control, if you will, moving the life force up and down the spine. So one of the things about Kriya Yoga that is so effective is that it brings you into the state of pratyahara, which in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras means internalization. So you start to experience this internal state of awareness, right? Withdrawing from the senses, if you will, to go inside. And the Kriya Yoga approach to pratyahara through doing this pranayama technique, this intentional breathing, is very, very effective. And it is much more effective than just a regular kind of mindfulness meditation. Most common meditation practice is that people learn to follow the breath, and then their breath slows down, and then they gradually get into meditation. But Kriya Yoga, because its design in stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, it leads to a sense withdrawal really quickly. And the way that we teach it at Modern Kriya, our website modernkriya.com, you can get into pratyahara in 5 minutes or less, into a deep meditative state, right? So Kriya Yoga is extremely effective for that. And as well, when one learns Kriya Yoga and starts to get into that internalized state and is doing these elongated breaths, right, that bring down the heart rate, that bring the body into a low idle, what often happens with many practitioners is they start to move into the tranquil breath, which is a very, very low idle state where you're hardly breathing at all. It has also been called the breathless state, as if the breath completely disappears. Now, the breath doesn't entirely disappear, but it almost seems to completely disappear. So it feels like you're not breathing, but you're just breathing very, very shallowly. And as a result, you get into this very, very internalized state, into what we would consider as a true meditation. And then things start to open up internally, right? You start to have inner experiences because you're no longer confined by what you're experiencing through your five senses. So you start to experience the more subtle aspects of you, right? Of you and the world around you. And you can have these, visions, you can have these, deep, kind of primal experiences inside, right? These transcendental experiences. So Kriya Yoga is very effective for that. And because of that, people have called it the pinnacle of yoga, the pinnacle of any kind of meditation or spiritual path. And Kriya Yoga is very, very effective for getting into that, for getting into the pratyahara and for getting into the tranquil breath, right? So you get very internalized. There are some things in the spiritual path, if you have been in the spiritual path, doing practices, following a spiritual teacher, etc., one of the things that you'll realize eventually is that the world around you can create sort of a disturbance for you, right? So you can do Kriya Yoga and you can get into these transcendental states, and then you go out into the world and then you're disturbed by things in the world. And so what people will often do in sort of elitist type of yogic path, right? Kriya Yoga, for example, is that they'll go, okay, the meditation is the most important thing because I get into a state of stillness, into transcendental bliss, all of that, and that is the most important. And my regular life, where I have interactions with other people and I get upset or disturbed or whatever, that's not real. That's not the real thing. It's the real me is my internal experience of bliss, right? So you see that it's creating an issue between an internal life and external life. The external life is perceived as a chaos, right? Or something that is at least distracting. And the internal life is the true. And so consequently, as a result of this, people will talk about how, the true self being the internal self and the false self or ego self being the external self, and not being able to reconcile those two. Now, this is a real problem, because if one says like the world is delusion and only the internal is real, you get into a head-to-head challenge with yourself, because you are both internal and external, right? You have an internal experience, an internal life, right? One might say like a spiritual life, and a worldly life, a worldly destiny. And really, to be able to reconcile those two things is what you need for development, right? If you were only internal, you would have no external experience. If it was really mattered, the true you was internal, why would you have a body, right? You need to interact in the world. And so this is why bringing together practices that address the internal, how to get internal, and as well practices that allow you to address interactions with other people, unresolved issues from the past, conflict, etc., practices that do that. When you bring those two together, that is the perfect synthesis for spiritual practices. And that's what we do at Modern Kriya, is that we bring together Kriya Yoga, which is very effective for bringing you internal, and Taoist internal alchemy, which is very effective for resolving internal issues that are triggered by external sources, right? So you need to be able to resolve the internal stuff, right? And to be able to act out in the world in a harmonious way, to live in an integrated fashion, right? An integrated one, what one might call a whole body enlightenment, right? Now, it doesn't happen overnight. You need to work at it, right? So that's the thing, is that when people talk about Kriya Yoga as being like, this is the pinnacle, and then I get into samadhi, right? Which is a transcendental kind of state, and then I'm good, everything else is false. They're deluding themselves, because when they come back to earth, come back to the regular consciousness and have these challenging interactions with other people, because they haven't done internal resolution of their own stuff, like they're in conflict, right? So really, Kriya Yoga is effective for going internal, but to be able to have inner transformation, that's why we bring in the Taoist internal alchemy, because things from the past, like our emotional challenges, etc., who we are as a personality, if we don't harmonize that internally, we can't have harmony with other people externally, right? Because the conflict is within us and it gets triggered by other people, right? We haven't resolved the conflict, and consequently we react, right? So that's what we do at Modern Kriya, is we know that Kriya Yoga helps to bring us internal, and then we use the Taoist internal alchemy to start to resolve some of the inner disharmonies so that we become more harmonious externally, right? So if you're only doing Kriya Yoga, right, you're getting into these states of bliss, right, into samadhi and all that kind of stuff, right? I challenge you to take inventory of your daily life and to see if there are aspects for improvement that are outside of your Kriya Yoga. So that's why at Modern Kriya, we teach both Kriya Yoga and Taoist internal alchemy. And the Kriya Yoga that we teach comes from the Panchanambhadacharya householder lineage of Kriya Yoga. And the Taoist internal alchemy approach complements that to help the internal resolutions so that we can have whole body spiritual enlightenment. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.